This evening we're going to be looking in Genesis, and we'll be looking there starting at chapter 33. We're studying basically the patriarchs, and we're looking at this time Jacob specifically and his life. And as we look at the life of Jacob, it's a life that's got a lot of ups and downs and turns and twists and some good things and bad things. As we study these scriptures in the Old Testament, what we find out, there's these people that God had in place for His purpose. They were far from perfect people. They had some problems, and we see in Jacob, sometimes he wasn't always truthful, and sometimes he failed, but we see his life trying to get back on track there in some of these chapters. We also see that with a family of a lot of children, he had a lot of problems with children, and he had a lot of heartaches, and he had some disasters in his family. And so tonight we're going to pick up in chapter 33. Now, if you remember, the last time we met, we saw Jacob. He left his father-in-law Laban, and he was heading back to his homeland there in Canaan. And on his way back, if you remember, he was told that Esau was out there going to meet him, and that really caused a lot of fear in him. And remember, Esau and him, when they left 20 years before, Esau was trying to kill him. He had a lot of anger and hatred, and he was tricked, and he was very with a lot of malice in his heart. Well, he left, and evidently there hadn't been much news from home, and he didn't know what was going on. So if you remember this, God met with him there that night. And remember when God wrestled Jacob. And Jacob, I think, got his life on track with God. And God changed his name to Israel. No more the supplanter, but the one who was to be mighty in God. And so God's purpose was going to be carried out through Jacob, this very imperfect person, but yet God had a big plan that needed to be carried out. And so he's thinking the worst about Esau. He divides his families up in different sections so they wouldn't all be killed. And we'll pick up in verse 33. Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with them 400 men. Okay? That's an army, 400 men. And he divided the children unto Leah and to Rachel and to the two handmaids. I think it's a little bit humorous how he put the people out in front. The handmaids went first, then the wife he didn't like quite as much the last, and then his wife he liked the most back at the back, so that's old survivor Jacob there, So he put the handmaids and their children foremost, okay. The ones that are not the real wives, get your kids and go first. And then Leah, well, Leah, you're pretty good. You go next. Rachel, my favorite wife, you stay back here with me. And then they went forth with Joseph in the back. And he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Jacob, one thing he's trying to go out of his way to show respect. If you remember earlier in chapter 32, he sent people ahead of him with like gifts and presents and all this kind of stuff. He's trying to appease the wrath of Esau. Because, man, he made Esau really mad when he left. Now he's coming back. He had all kinds of goods and everything. He says, I'll buy him back here, buy him up here. And so he comes with great respect. And Esau ran to meet him. I could just see him running toward Jacob, and Jacob saying, oh no, he's even anxious to kill me. Okay? He's not just going to kill me, he's anxious to kill him. But little Jacob, to his surprise, he embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. What a thing happened to Esau here. Time healed the wounds. We have no record of Esau finding God or anything even at this point. We don't have that record, but although God did a work in Esau, the only thing I can say, God did something miraculous. God sometimes can melt the cold hearts of a person to bring unity. Why? Because he had a plan with Jacob. And Esau over 20 years, had mellowed out to some. Esau had got over his anger. Esau had got over his maliciousness. And so what seemed to be a disastrous meeting turned into a great reunion of these two brothers for so long ago. You know, as I think about this, how Jacob, just the night before, he spent all night with God. You know, when we spend time with God and then go into the situations, things can turn out a lot better. You know, when we have to have meetings and times together with relationships that are maybe severed, you know, they may be strained. You know, and no one likes to go. I'm the first one. I do not like to go into those situations. I just try to, I can avoid that. I'll avoid that. You know, and but you know, sometimes you can't avoid them. So if we know we got to go into a relationship with somebody that's been strained in a relationship, what should we do? Well, spend time with God before you go. Spend time in prayer. Spend time in the Word. You know, make sure you're right with God. Let God take care of that other person. And sure enough, that Esau here was a complete different situation than he expected. Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children and said, "Who are those with thee?" And he said, "The children of God graciously give thy, so God give thee." You know, Jacob is very, at this point, he accounts that God is the one who gave him the blessings. God give me the children, God give me all these animals, which meant wealth, and so he basically shared their family. You know, after 20 years, it's just like any kind of family reunion. You get together, you haven't seen it in long. Well, who's that child? Well, this is this child. Well, you know, and who's that? It's a reunion that's getting together. I mean, times have I've been with. Sometimes if I'm not with family a long time, you know, and you get back with them, and all of a sudden they got these little children you didn't even see before. You know, and then you get you meet them and you talk with them and get to know them. That's what Esau and Jacob was doing here. And Esau tries to give him back the gifts. He said, "Jacob, nah, you don't need to buy my love back. You're fine." But Jacob wouldn't hear to it. He said, "Jacob, no, you have these." He said, "God's blessed me with lots of things. And God, I want you to have these gifts." And so Jacob made him take these gifts. Esau then accepted. And you see this reunion here, it's patching up the difficult days. Esau wanted him actually to go with him and spend some time with him, although Jacob, this is a little bit of a passage. I don't know whether, some think that Jacob intentionally lied to his brother here. If you read this whole passage, he wanted him to go to a place called Seir. And Jacob said, "No, I can't right now. We got all these animals to take care of things. I'll come over to you then later on." Well, we have no record of that. As soon as he left there, he heads to a place called Succoth. It's not the same location. It's in a different direction. I don't know. Some people just say it was blatantly lied to him. Although we don't have any record of God saying he lied to him. Maybe that his intentions was maybe to do it. You know how sometimes your intentions are to do something. And then, well, directions change, the circumstances change, and he didn't. I don't know whether he just told him a bold-faced lie after all the things that he said God did in his life. I'd have a little bit of trouble with that. I think maybe he originally intended maybe to go there, and then all of a sudden, just over time there, he just decided I couldn't make the trip. It's not an easy thing with the kind of group of people he had and everything to do that. So we don't have the record of him going to him. We have the record going to the place called Succoth. So Jacob, it says he journeyed to Succoth and built him a house. There he built his place to live, and that became the settling place for Jacob back in his new land. And so he finds him erecting an altar. You see him worshiping God, and so he's reestablishing his roots. God told him he's going to be back in that land. He's back in that land again. and he's reestablishing his roots. He's reestablishing his place of residency, we could say. In chapter 34 is a chapter that's just a real ugly chapter of behavior, okay? Unfortunately, like I said, there's a lot of things in the lives of some of these characters that are surely not exemplary. And I guess one of the things that shows the truthfulness of the Bible, it never tries to hide the sinfulness of man. You never find in the Bible where they try to make these patriarchs and these Bible characters look like sinless people out here that it was doing the work of God and almost like these angelic beings. No, actually you find them doing some pretty bad stuff. And as I'm sort of going to maybe summarize some of this chapter here tonight, basically Jacob has a daughter named Dinah, the daughter of Leah, and when she's into this new land, she goes to a place called Shechem, or meets this guy called Shechem, the son of Hamor, a Hivite, and basically she goes into this group of men, this group of a community, and this guy defiles her, immoral with her, and then she comes back, and the news gets back to Jacob then to the children of Jacob. Well, you know, in this day, for a family to have a daughter that was used in this manner, that brought a lot of anger to the family. Now, there's one thing is anger, the other thing is how they handled it. You know, they took there was this one sin involved here, and then what we see then is a greater sin going after that, trying to get even, trying to get revenge. Actually, the people there of this community, the father there comes to visit Jacob and says, you know, well, he says, why don't we just try to get our two groups together? Okay? Hamor is the father of Shechem. He goes and he goes to Jacob. He goes to this group there, the sons of Jacob, and he says, why don't we get together and have some exchange in our peoples? You know, so this guy here is sort of trying to mend the two groups together. Now, unfortunately, too, this guy had some idealist type of thinking, but Jacob and his family wasn't supposed to get in with these ungodly people either. Okay? As you look at this, Hamor, he was looking at, it doesn't matter who you yoke up with, you know, we're good for you, you live in this town, we live in this town, and I serve these gods, you serve them gods, and you know, that's all right, we'll put all that differences aside, and we'll just marry, and we'll do trade, and we'll do all this stuff together. Now, Jacob really could not have gone into that kind of a situation either. God had told him about some things about going into the wrong type of people, and you know, and sometimes a non-Christian will look at an event to bring reconciliation different than a Christian will. You know, the non-Christian won't think of the spiritual aspects of things. So what happens? The brothers here are the sons of Jacob, and they find out about this thing, and they're very upset. I'm trying to come down here, and it says, the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father deceitfully. So basically the sons came in, and they're angry, they know what's going on, they see Hamor here, and they say, yeah, let's get together. Yeah, you can marry our sister. Okay, but there's just one thing you got to do. You know, we're the sons of Abraham, and we're the sons of Isaac, the sons of Jacob, and we have this thing that's necessary for our religious things that we do. It's the rite of circumcision, and we can't have you guys marry our family unless you guys go through this. So we want you all to go through this, and then we will match you. We'll come together with you. of course, it was deceit. It was a lie. So we see, unfortunately, the sons of Jacob acting much like Jacob did at one time, with deceit. And so this father says, okay, let's do this. Let's try to get together with this. So this is where some of the ungodly ones are acting better off than this should be the godly ones. Jacob and his family should have been the ones who had greater integrity, greater honesty. But what we find out is these people who were basically a pagan group of people was being more honest than what Jacob and his family. Well, that's a sad story, isn't it? Like I say, when you see the study of the scriptures and some of the people in the Bible, it's not all idealistic. It's not all like, they don't always do what they should do. Well, they got this group of guys to do this, and it was sort of like a surgical thing, and then they were all very laid up for a while. And during this time of being laid up, Jacob's sons come in with swords and kills all the village men. Wipes them out. And then basically he takes the spoils of their community, takes the widows, the children, and takes them back to be part of their family and be used by them. This is a bad chapter of the Bible as far as seeing how humanity sometimes works. What does the Bible say about the heart of man later on in the prophets? Jeremiah says, desperately wicked, who can know it? And this is what we see sometimes in the scripture. Man's heart can just do bad things. There's the sons of Jacob, basically, deceiving this. They were angry at what happened to their sister, but their solution to the anger was not right. The solution to their anger was even worse than what the original sin was. And as we find in the Bible, though, I think Jacob, surprisingly, he's sort of upset at him, mad at him, because he's going to be looked at as not as a very good person. You didn't think, really, he wasn't even too grieving that they'd murdered all these people. So it's one of these chapters of the Bible where you look at and you say, man, how can this be? And the only thing we just find out is that man, without God or without being directed by the Lord, can get in bad shape and can do things way out of the will of God. So it's not a pretty chapter of the Bible. And we see some of the sons of Jacob not following the ways of God very well. When we get later on down here, when Joseph gets to be part of the picture, these same sons who wiped out this one family, they're willing to kill their own brother. So this is not a good group of guys at this point. And they're not a very godly group at all. I just want to go to chapter 35 and touch on some highlights in this. God comes back to Jacob again and reaffirms his relationship with him. Remember, God is going to build his nation in spite of these people. They weren't always good people. And God said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel, and dwell there, and make there an altar unto God that appeared to thee when thou feddest from the face of Esau thy brother. So I want you to go back and get reestablished with me. Jacob said to the household and to all that was with him, now look at this, put away thy strange gods that are among you, and be clean and change your garments. What had happened to his family and his people? They started getting filtered, saturated with these false gods again. They put things in their lives, weren't they, that was just God didn't want there. This is the days that Jacob lived in. This day it was filled with all kinds of people worshiping all kinds of things, polytheistic societies. And it was the hardest thing for God to get across to his people that serve only him. Now at this point, you understand, they didn't have all the word, they didn't have much of the word yet. Okay, they didn't have the commandments. Later on down the road, and it's still a long ways off, till God brings Moses into the scene, who actually gives us the Ten Commandments that tells us that not to have any gods. Okay, so it's a long ways from that point yet, quite a few hundred years yet, but yet God had put into these lives personally. He spoke to Abraham, he spoke to Isaac, he spoke to Jacob about himself. But it was always a continuing problem about putting things in their life for other gods. And even after they got the law, of course, the law didn't change their hearts. The law just let them know what God expected, and they had that trouble for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so let us rise and go up to Bethel, and I will make thee an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and was with me in the way which I went. They gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which were in their hand, and all their earrings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under an oak tree which was by Shechem. And they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that was round about them, and they did not pursue after the sons of Jacob. So Jacob came to Luz, which is in the land of Canaan, that is Bethel, he and all the people that were with him. And he built an altar and called the place El Bethel, because the God appeared unto him when he fled from the face of his brother. So he goes back to God there, and he meets with God, and basically needing the mercy of God. You know, his family had committed a lot of sins here recently. You know, what do you do when your family is broke down in every moral way and spiritual way? Well, you try to get back to God. You need mercy. You know, that's what Jacob was doing. Isn't it interesting, God's long suffering with Jacob and his family? You know, God could have just said, I'm going to wipe this group off and start over. But no, he doesn't. He's long suffering and merciful. So sometimes we're very hard to say, well, how come God wasn't more harder on old Jacob? Well, how come God's not harder on us? You know, we've all times had our times in lives that weren't very spiritual. So the same God that's long-suffering toward Jacob is still the same God that's long-suffering to us, and we can thank him for that, can't we? There's 3 deaths in this book, in this chapter here, that was probably a very, very difficult time for Jacob. One was Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died. Now, Rebekah was his mother, and Deborah was just a long-standing nurse, and so she was probably around Jacob growing up as a child, and probably took care of him, and so she was a close friend of the family. And so the scripture made mention of this because she was probably a very important person in his life. And then we see God appearing, and God appeared to Jacob again when he put out the pad of Aram and blessed him. And God said to him, Thy name is Jacob, thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel shall bear the name. And he called his name Israel. Remember, he reiterates that from the couple chapters ago. And God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful, multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. So what's God doing to Jacob? Reestablishing this covenant that he had made with Isaac and made with Abraham. Again, it's the unconditional covenant of God, this Abrahamic covenant, that he makes sure that is passed on down regardless of their faithfulness. And again, the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac to thee, will I give it to thee, and to thy seed after thee will I give the land. This is where we're told about a drink offering here. Jacob set a pillar in the place where he talked with him, even a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering thereon, and he poured oil thereon. A drink offering is symbolizing giving it all out to you, giving it all, pouring it out to you, to God. As we see in this chapter, we also find out that he loses the most precious thing to his life is Rachel. At this point, Rachel has her last son here, Benjamin, and during the time of her giving this child in childbirth, Rachel died. And so Benjamin is a precious child to him, and of course this probably was the death that probably caused him much, much pain in his life. Rachel, the one he loved and so dearly, and was willing to work for so many years to get from Laban. And so here now he's grieving over his wife's death. And then he records the death of Isaac. Isaac lived to be 180 years old, and so actually, when Isaac called in Jacob, years before, that he was dying, really he wasn't dying, he just thought he was dying. So I'm sure everybody's had those experiences. Oh, I've got to be dying, I feel so bad, but actually wasn't. So he lived a number more years and finally dies. And then he said Isaac gave up the ghost and died and was gathered into his people, being old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. You just wonder that day on the funeral. Wonder what Esau and Jacob talked about. The times of Isaac's, his love for Esau was really greater than his love for Jacob. But they did what all families do. They most of the time they have to put their differences aside. They have to go do what's necessary. So Isaac is gone. He was Abraham's promised seed that took for many, many years to come. The one who was in the plan of God. He's now gone. And we're going to pick up the story the next time as Jacob's lives go on, and we see the ups and downs of this person in his life.